The cold wind cut across the tarmac like a razor that morning, dragging grit and frost under steel gray skies. The storm hadn't hit yet, but the clouds pressing down over Carson Air Base told a different story. Pilots grumbled. Technicians moved faster than usual, and somewhere behind the roar of fuel pumps and chatter of maintenance crews, a lone figure walked unnoticed between rows of grounded helicopters. Her name tag read M. Callahan, and beneath it, there were no wings. She wasn't on the flight roster. She hadn't been for years. Her olive-drab uniform matched the others around her, but the absence of that silver insignia above her pocket made all the difference. Most of the younger airmen barely looked her way. To them, she was just another technician. Flight support. The kind of person you only noticed when something broke. But the older ones knew. They didn't talk about it, not openly. They remembered what happened on the Ash Creek run. The flight that never made it home. The crash that buried 3 good men in snow and silence. Callahan flew that mission. She survived. Barely. And ever since then, she'd been grounded. Not by the storm, but by doubt, by bureaucracy, and maybe, just maybe, by choice. Still, she came to work every day. Quiet, precise, invisible. The kind of invisible that made others uncomfortable. "Hey, Callahan," one of the new lieutenants called out across the hangar that morning. He was leaning on a toolbox, trying to sound casual. "Ever think about flying one of these for real?" She didn't even look up. "Just making sure you don't fall out of the sky," she said without blinking. A few chuckles rippled through the room. Not cruel, but sharp enough to sting. It was the same joke they'd tossed around for years. They thought it was harmless. She just kept walking, clipboard in hand, checking a line of sensor diagnostics on a long idled UH-60 Black Hawk. Callahan had a rhythm. Morning diagnostics, midday flight simulations, late-night recalibrations when no one else was watching. It wasn't glamorous, but the birds she touched always came back smoother, cleaner, safer. She never missed a warning light. She never left a loose wire. In a small, dust-covered office near the edge of the base, there hung an old photo. A team in full flight gear, lined up in front of a chopper, smiling, squinting into the sun. Near the edge of the frame, almost cropped out, was a short figure with a helmet under one arm, her eyes unreadable. Callahan stood in front of it longer than she meant to. Back then, she'd had a name in the sky, a reputation. But after Ash Creek, that name vanished from manifests and mission briefings. The official report said mechanical failure, but the unspoken verdict was clearer: she was flying. So she must have been to blame. At lunch, she sat alone. Always the same corner, same table. The TV in the mess hall was showing a storm tracker, snow and sleet curling in over the Rockies like claws. All flights were grounded. Emergency medevac. Only if regional command signed off, and they weren't signing anything until the skies cleared. No one noticed when the medic paused by her tray. "You used to fly, right?" he asked quietly. "Used to," she replied without looking up. He gave a soft nod. "Guessing you miss it." She didn't answer, but she didn't deny it either. That afternoon, a distress call broke across the emergency channel like lightning through dead air. "Mayday, Mayday, this is Falcon 2. We're going down, Grid 9 Echo. 3 injured, 1 critical. No ground access. Request immediate extraction." Silence swallowed the ops room. The weather in the mountains was chokingly bad. Visibility near zero, roads washed out, the ridge thick with wind shear. Grid 9 Echo was a dead zone. The commander looked around. "No flights are cleared. There's nothing we can do." Callahan stood at the back of the room listening. She'd seen this before. The storm, the hesitation, the policies that bled people out behind red tape. She stepped forward. "I'll take it." The room froze. "You're not cleared," the commander said. She met his eyes. "Neither is anyone else. You haven't flown in. I've run every diagnostic on Eagle 2. I've memorized the terrain. I know that bird. I flew it before Ash Creek." The room stirred. A young pilot stepped back. "She flew the Ash Creek mission?" he whispered. Another paled. She pulled out an old ignition key, one that wasn't supposed to exist anymore. "This key starts Eagle 2. A long silence. The commander finally nodded. "You've got 30 minutes. The rest moved fast. Technicians scrambled. Fuel lines hissed. Callahan climbed into the cockpit like she'd never left it. Every switch she flipped came alive like muscle memory. Her gloves gripped the controls. The storm roared outside like it remembered her too. She flew alone, no co-pilot, no medic. Just her and a sky that had once tried to kill her. She navigated by feel, each mountain pass etched into her memory from missions past. The sleet slammed against the windshield. Sensors blinked with ice warnings, and still she pressed on. Because someone was waiting, and no one else was coming. When she reached the wreck, the soldiers were barely visible in the storm. One was waving a flare in tight circles. She dropped the chopper onto a narrow ledge, barely 6 feet across, steady as a surgeon's hand, helped load the wounded. Lifted off into a crosswind strong enough to spin the tail. But she brought them home. Back at Carson, no one laughed when she walked across the tarmac again. No one made jokes. The next morning, she was called into the command briefing. A silver pair of pilot wings sat in a velvet box. The commander handed them to her without fanfare. "For too long," he said, "we allowed the wrong version of your story to stand." She pinned the wings to her chest. Quietly, precisely. And outside, the snow began to melt. The wind didn't howl that afternoon. It warned. By 1400 hours, the tarmac at Carson Air Base had taken on a stillness that wasn't natural. The sky was a lid of dull silver, the kind of steel, gray blanket that pressed against the mountains and whispered promises of worse to come. Radar crews monitored a sprawling storm system curling down from the northern range. Heavy sleet, zero visibility, and gusts that had already grounded 3 regional flights. Every 5 minutes, new alerts flashed red on the ops center boards. By 1500, the order came down from regional command: lock down all non-essential operations. Prepare for 48 hours of flight inactivity. Inside the base's command center, the atmosphere changed in an instant. The clipped voices and quick-moving personnel didn't slow, but their tone did, colder, more procedural. The flight manifest was cleared. Training flights were postponed. Medevac permissions would require direct clearance from Division HQ, and no one expected that green light to come during a storm like this. Across the hangar, tech crews tightened down rotor blades and sealed maintenance bays. Even the hardened pilots, men and women who'd flown through combat zones and wildfire smoke, cast uneasy glances at the forecast board. The storm wasn't just weather. It was a wall that didn't care who was waiting behind it. In the middle of it all, Marian Callahan worked silently. Her sleeves rolled just high enough to show the edge of a faded scar on her forearm, one few dared ask about. She moved with the same purpose she always had, tightening bolts on a downed Kiowa, reviewing calibration readouts, checking emergency flares and cockpit seals. But today something was different. The birds weren't just grounded. They were trapped. In the mess hall, the televisions looped satellite imagery of the storm's approach, its cold arms already hugging the valley below Carson, pulling moisture and darkness in equal measure. The narrator's voice, sterile and certain, echoed through the near-empty room. Major accumulation expected above 7,000 feet. Civilian air traffic suspended. Avalanche risk for several mountain passes remains high. Callahan sat alone at her usual table. Her ration tray was untouched. A young medic passing by paused, recognition flickering across his face. "You flew before, didn't you?" he asked carefully. She looked at him, expression unreadable. "Once? Ever fly in anything like this?" She didn't answer right away. She glanced toward the screen, then down at her tray. "Storms like this," she said softly, "don't give you a second pass." He didn't know what to say. After a moment, he simply nodded and walked on. By late afternoon, the base had become a different place entirely. The alert board listed flight after flight marked delayed or delayed. A civilian request for aerial rescue in the foothills. Declined. A mountain patrol overdue by 3 hours. Status awaiting further instruction. Protocols had taken over. Paperwork now dictated life or death. Inside the hangar, Callahan stood by the main doors, arms folded across her chest. Outside, the clouds hugged the ridgelines so tightly the peaks had vanished. She could read the signs better than most. The storm wasn't going to blow over, it would settle. And once it did, anyone caught out there wouldn't just be delayed. They'd be forgotten. She turned back toward her workstation and checked the standby logs. Every aircraft marked flight ready was showing green across the board. Fuel levels were full, diagnostics clean, but flight control status for all birds read the same: restricted. She stared at that word for a long moment. Then, as if the universe couldn't wait anymore, the call came in. Mayday, Mayday, this is Falcon 2, we are going down. Grid 9 Echo, I repeat 9 Echo, rotor failure. 3 injured, 1 critical. Request immediate assistance. Visibility nil. No ground access. The command center snapped to full alert, chairs scraped. Headsets activated. Radar operators scanned the screen for coordinates. Grid 9 Echo, deep in the mountains. No road access. No backup outposts. And no chance of ground support in time. The commander's voice was steady but tight. Weather corridors collapsed. We can't send anyone in this. Another officer confirmed the obvious. Every flight's grounded. Risk too high. Visibility near zero. Best option is to wait it out. But they won't survive the night? Someone muttered. Everyone heard it. No one replied. From the back of the room, Callahan stood still, hands clasped behind her. She had seen this exact moment once before. Different coordinates, different voices on the radio, but the same slow shift, from urgency to resignation, from possibility to policy. She didn't wait for the storm to make the decision for them. I'll take it, she said. Heads turned. The room fell silent. The emergency broadcast pierced the tension like a gunshot. Mayday, Mayday, this is Falcon 2. We are going down. Grid 9 Echo. I repeat, Grid 9 Echo. Rotor failure, 3 injured, 1 critical. Request immediate extraction. Visibility nil. No ground access. Inside Carson Air Base's operations center, every conversation stopped. The buzz of routine vanished. Screens flickered with radar pings, signal flares, and storm overlays. A senior comms officer grabbed the mic, speaking fast but clear. Falcon 2, confirm position. Repeat, confirm grid. We are assessing route status. The reply came back, weak and breaking with static. Negative cover, weather worsening. Holding position, need evac. Medical critical. The room locked in around that signal like a heartbeat. Officers moved quickly, opening maps, calculating altitudes. Someone read the coordinates again. Grid 9 Echo. Every veteran in the room knew what that meant: steep ridgelines, unstable air columns, zero ground access even in good weather. Now, it was suicide. A captain stood up. Well, wait, there's nothing we can do until this clears. The base commander looked grim. I want every available bird ready the moment this front lifts. We hold for clearance. But they all knew. By the time the skies opened, Falcon 2 would be a wreck buried in snow. At the back of the room, Marion Callahan hadn't moved. She had heard every word. Grid 9, Echo, she knew it. Not just the coordinates, the terrain, the blind turns, the dangerous downdrafts between the peaks. She had flown it more times than she could count back when she wore wings. Back when her name meant something. And now, it meant silence. She stepped forward, slowly but with certainty. I'll take it, she said. Heads turned. One by one, the commander frowned. Callahan, you're not cleared. You know that? No one is, she replied. That's the problem. You haven't flown in. I know the route. I've flown it in worse. I've run diagnostics on every chopper in that hangar. Eagle 2 is flight ready, and I've flown her before. Someone scoffed quietly from the side. Another muttered, she's not serious. But Callahan was already reaching into her jacket. She pulled out a small, worn key on a faded chain, scuffed, scratched, and old enough that several of the junior officers didn't even recognize it. This starts Eagle 2, she said, holding it up. Gasps echoed. One young officer stepped back. Another whispered, that's from the Ash Creek bird. The room shifted again, this time from disbelief to something else. Unease. Respect. Memory. A long pause followed. The commander looked at her. Hard. He wasn't just weighing risk. He was staring at the past, trying to decide if it still had value. If you fail, I won't, she said. Calm. Not arrogant, just certain. He held her gaze for a few more seconds, then gave a tight nod. You have 30 minutes. Go. The operations center exploded into motion. Technicians raced to prep Eagle 2, pulling off covers, running final checks, double securing emergency packs. Fuel lines hissed to life. Callahan walked toward the hangar like she was stepping into something she had already done. Her expression didn't change, but her stride did. Not hesitant, not nostalgic, just sharp. Alive. A junior crewman paused beside her. Why didn't you tell anyone? He asked softly. She climbed into the cockpit, flipped the master switches, and said without looking up, no one asked. Outside, the storm roared now. Sleet hammered the windshield as Eagle 2 lifted slowly off the tarmac. Her hands moved over the controls with practiced precision. She didn't hesitate, didn't flinch. The bird responded as if it remembered her, like a soldier waiting for its rightful pilot. The tower gave her a final burst of data: wind direction, ice build-up patterns, cloud ceiling. She barely acknowledged it. Callahan wasn't flying by instruments. She was flying by instinct, by memory. Behind her, the empty cabin held 3 strapped-down med kits, packed personally, because there wasn't time for a crew. And even if there had been, no one volunteered to go with her. It didn't matter. This mission wasn't about protocol. It was about people. People who were bleeding out on a ridge no one else would reach in time. Back in the command center, telemetry from Eagle 2 appeared on the main screen, showing a smooth climb, sharp turns, steady altitude. The wind screamed over the ridgelines, but she adjusted with precision, riding the gusts like ocean swells. "She's good," one of the younger pilots murmured. The commander didn't answer, but his arms were crossed tight, eyes glued to the screen. "How long was she grounded again?" Another asked. 2 years, someone answered. "For Ash Creek." A beat of silence. "That's what the paperwork says," the commander finally replied, but no one in that room believed the paperwork anymore. Meanwhile, over Grid 9 Echo, visibility dropped to less than 100 feet. Rain turned to sleet. The rotors strained. Callahan's fingers flicked toggles, adjusted pitch. Warnings lit up: altitude drift, rotor tension. She answered them all like she was born in the cockpit. Then she saw it. Just a flicker of shape. Metal twisted on a cliffside, smoke curling up into storm clouds. Falcon 2. And beside it a faint red flare. She dipped the nose of Eagle 2, hovered just above a flattened outcrop barely the size of a parking space. 6 feet wide. No margin for error, but she didn't need margin, she needed resolve. And she had plenty of that. The hangar was a storm of motion, but inside Eagle 2, time seemed to slow. The rain hissed against the fuselage like it remembered her, like it had been waiting. Marion Callahan sat in the cockpit, shoulders squared, helmet pulled down tight. The startup sequence blinked green, one line at a time. Battery, rotors, navigation, fuel, all systems clean. She hadn't flown in 2 years. Not since Ash Creek, a mission buried deeper than the crash report itself. Officially, it had been mechanical failure. Unofficially, they said Callahan had hesitated, that she'd misjudged a weather cell, that her delay cost lives. She never argued. She never defended herself. She just accepted the grounding, turned in her wings, and walked back into the hangar, quiet, obedient, forgotten, until now. Minutes earlier in the operations center, her declaration had cracked the chain of command like a lightning bolt. "I'll take it," she had said, voice clear. The room froze. "You're not authorized to fly," the commander replied, arms stiff across his chest. Callahan met his eyes without blinking. "Sir, no one is. You haven't been on active flight status for 24 months. I've run diagnostics on every bird in that hangar. I know that route better than any pilot here, and I've flown Eagle 2 more times than I can count." Someone muttered under their breath. Another chuckled, nervously. "This isn't your call to make," the commander warned. Callahan didn't argue. She reached slowly into the inside pocket of her flight jacket and pulled out a key. Not just any key, a small brass ignition key, scratched and old. It shouldn't have existed anymore. "This," she said, holding it up for all to see, "starts Eagle 2. Gas rippled across the room like a shockwave. A few officers took an instinctive step back. "That's impossible," one of them whispered. "Those keys were decommissioned after the Santoro Opie." Another voice, lower, almost reverent. "She was on the Santoro mission." The commander's face hardened. He knew the name. Everyone in that room who had worn a uniform for more than a few years did. Operation Santoro, a deep penetration Black Ops rescue buried under 5 layers of redacted files. The only thing that ever slipped through the cracks was the failure. A bird lost. Pilots dead. Callahan survived, but just barely. Rumor said she was the one who flew them out. Rumor also said she wasn't supposed to be there in the first place. That made 2 times now. The commander stared at her for a long moment. "If you go out there and fail," Callahan cut him off. "I won't." It wasn't arrogance. It wasn't even confidence. It was memory. She had already lived the worst-case scenario, and she had survived it. 30 minutes. That's what he gave her. In that time, she prepped Eagle 2 without a crew, without a co-pilot, without ceremony. Only a few medkits and her own 2 hands. No one volunteered to go with her, not out of disrespect, but out of fear. And maybe, deep down, because they knew it wasn't their mission to fly. This one belonged to her. As the rain thickened and visibility dropped below 300 feet, she rolled Eagle 2 toward the open hangar doors. Lightning forked above the mountains, lighting up the sky in sharp, jagged flashes. The wind fought against the rotor blades, but they held. In the comms tower, the senior flight officer leaned into his mic. Eagle 2, this is Tower. Confirm intent and mission. Callahan's voice came back cool. Even Tower, this is Eagle 2. Departing for Grid 9 Echo. Rescue up Falcon 2 crew. 3 injured, 1 critical. There was a pause. Then, Goodspeed, Eagle 2. You're cleared for unauthorized action. A joke maybe. A truth, absolutely. Back in the command center, no one laughed now. All eyes were locked on her telemetry as the chopper lifted off. The digital readout showed a clean ascent into brutal conditions. Rain slicing across the canopy, wind pressure peaking and dipping. She's flying like she never left. One officer murmured. The commander didn't speak, but he moved closer to the screen, and he stayed there. Inside the chopper, the world was reduced to instruments and instinct. Callahan's fingers flicked across toggles, adjusting trim, reading airflow. She'd flown this valley in storms before, but never with this much on the line. The mountain corridor to Grid 9. Echo was known among veterans as the Throat, a wending path with sheer winds that could roll an aircraft like a coin. She didn't fight the wind. She listened to it. Shift left, drop throttle, ride the gust. Every movement she made was deliberate, precise. Every muscle remembered its role. This wasn't a comeback. It was a return to form. At 6,000 feet, the turbulence worsened. Warnings blinked across the display. ALTIT drive T, ICSECUMUATION, Rotar STRIN. She acknowledged them all without flinching. By now, Falcon 2's signal had nearly dropped out completely. Just static and fragments of desperate calls. She caught one final transmission. Stabilizing, critical pressure dropping. Visuals nil, please hurry. Callahan leaned into the wind and didn't respond. She didn't need to. Just before the ridge broke open, she spotted it, a sliver of smoke rising from a broken tail rotor. The wreck of Falcon 2 clung to the side of the mountain like a wounded bird. A flare flickered weakly in the mist. She dropped altitude slowly, the wind fighting her every inch of the way. Her eyes scanned for a place to land. There wasn't one, except a rock outcrop, 6 feet wide, barely enough for one skid to balance. But she didn't need both. She just needed control. And that Marion Callahan had in spades. Eagle 2 slipped into the clouds like a ghost. The rotors strained against the sleet. Thick wind, every gust trying to rip the bird off course. But Marion Callahan didn't fight the storm with brute force. She read it. Every dip in pressure, every flicker in the controls, every howl through the fuselage told her what came next. To others, this flight was madness. But to her, it was muscle memory. She flew alone, no copilot, no medic, no backup. Just a chopper full of strapped-in mechits and the weight of 3 lives depending on her. Lives she hadn't seen. Voices she'd only heard through static. And yet somehow, she knew them already. Because she had been them once, left out in the cold, waiting on a miracle that never came. This time the miracle had wings. As the chopper climbed past 7,000 feet, snow began to stick to the windshield. She toggled the de-icing systems and adjusted power flow to compensate. The warning lights blinked, rotor strain, limited visibility, wind shear. She acknowledged each alert with a flick of her finger, calm as if she were flying a training route. No one was talking in her headset now, just occasional squawks from the tower trying to update her on wind velocity, which she already knew. The maps didn't matter. The terrain didn't scare her. This wasn't navigation. It was instinct. She remembered every ridge, every wind pocket carved by years of weather and war. She had flown this corridor under fire once, and now she was flying it under time. Suddenly, through a break in the clouds, she saw it. Falcon 2. The wreckage was splayed across a jagged slope, its tail sheared off, nose crumpled against rock. A faint trail of smoke curled into the blizzard. A single flare pulsed red through the storm, barely visible, but alive. Callahan hovered, her heart pounding, not from fear but focus. There was no proper landing zone, just a narrow rock ledge, maybe 6 feet wide, slick with ice and partially crumbling. But she didn't hesitate. She began her descent. The wind surged from the left. She compensated with right rudder. The tail swung gently. Alarms chirped. Altitude drift. She breathed once. Shallow. Controlled. Down 5 feet. Stabilize. Wind shift. Adjust trim. The skid touched first, just one. The other hovered over open space. The chopper tilted slightly, but Callahan corrected with precision only time and failure could teach. She landed. Clean. Controlled. Impossibly, one of the soldiers scrambled forward, supporting a second man with a field dressing on his shoulder. The third, unmoving, was already strapped to a stretcher. Callahan jumped out into the wind, her gloves instantly icing up. The soldier's mouth moved, but she couldn't hear him. She didn't need to. Together, they loaded the first 2 aboard. Then Callahan bent to secure the stretcher, her hands numb, breath catching in the freezing air. The critically injured man was pale, lips blue, but breathing. Inside, the standing soldier grabbed the comm and shouted, "Falcon 2 secured. 3 aboard." Callahan climbed back into the pilot's seat, slammed the door, and powered up. The wind caught the tail again, a sharp spin. For a terrifying moment, the bird drifted too far right, rotors inches from the rock face. She gritted her teeth, counterbalanced, and the rotors leveled. The lift began, slow groaning. The chopper strained against the air. One warning light blinked red, rotor drag. She adjusted thrust, eased the weight, found the pocket of updraft she knew had to be there, and they rose. The storm, however, wasn't finished. On the return, conditions worsened. The main route was now completely iced over, wind at 60 knots, visibility 0. She didn't wait for clearance. She made a decision, secondary pass. Wider, lower, but longer. It would add 10 minutes. But it would shield the rotors from crosswind and avoid ice accumulation, if she timed it right. In the cabin behind her, the mechits rattled. The injured soldier moaned softly. One of the conscious men clung to the side rail, whispering what sounded like a prayer. She didn't speak, she flew. At 200 feet, the left side sensor began blinking. Ice forming. She toggled rotor heating, rebalanced airflow. The engine growled under strain, but the lift held. Every minute felt like a gamble. Every gust another test. This wasn't survival. It was defiance. Finally, the outer marker of Carson Air Base broke through the mist. The landing pad below was lit up, medics standing by, gurneys ready. The tower cleared her in. Priority 1. Callahan didn't make a show of it. She brought Eagle 2 down like it was a Sunday drill. Steady, smooth, rotors whistling in protest, but holding firm. The skids touched pavement. They were home. As the rotors wound down, medics swarmed the chopper, pulling the injured from the cabin with expert speed. The last soldier out, young, bruised, trembling, turned and looked back at her through the door. His mouth moved. "Thank you." Callahan just nodded. She didn't step out into applause. There was none. She walked across the tarmac as if she had just finished any other shift. Her boots echoed on wet concrete. A few airmen watched in silence. One even raised his hand in a quiet salute. Not out of protocol, but respect. She didn't return it. Not out of coldness. Out of habit. Inside the hangar, she sat back in the cockpit for a long time, letting the engine's hum fade. The rain tapped gently against the windshield now, no longer angry, just tired. So was she. But she hadn't failed. 3 lives were still breathing because she remembered who she was. And for the first time in years, so did everyone else. The rain hadn't stopped, but it had softened, as if even the storm knew it had lost. Inside the cockpit of Eagle 2, Marion Callahan sat still, hands resting quietly in her lap. The adrenaline had faded, leaving only the heavy throb of exhaustion and something deeper clarity. For the first time in years, she hadn't just operated a machine. She had owned the sky again. The engine ticked gently as it cooled. Outside, stretchers were being wheeled into waiting ambulances, their wheels cutting wet tracks across the pavement. The 3 men from Falcon 2 had survived, all of them. No celebration broke out, no cheering. Just the efficient, clinical calm of a mission completed. The kind that usually came with paperwork, not applause. And that was fine with Callahan. She didn't come back for thanks. As she stepped down from the chopper, boots crunching on the wet concrete, several crew members paused what they were doing. Some lowered tools. A few straightened instinctively, as if part of them still recognized the posture of someone who had earned the air. She walked back to the hangar without a word. No one stopped her. No one dared. By morning, everyone on base had heard. Not just the pilots or the command staff, but the technicians, the quartermasters, the mess hall cooks, even the cleaning crew. It started as whispers, then turned into knowing looks, and by the time the coffee brewed, it had become legend. A body cam clip from one of the rescued soldiers had circulated through the internal network. It showed a sliver of storm-choked sky, then a rotor shadow cutting through the clouds like something unreal. The flare's red light glinted off the belly of Eagle 2 as it descended into the mist. And just before the screen cut to static, someone off camera had said, barely audible, "I thought angels had wings." That afternoon, the commander found her. She was back in the hangar, wiping down tools, her jacket still damp from the night before. He approached without ceremony, in his hand a sealed envelope. She looked at it, then at him. He didn't speak, just offered a small nod. Inside the envelope was a flight reinstatement order signed. Official. Her name printed cleanly at the top. Status cleared for active duty. Authorization immediate. Reason valor in adverse conditions. At the bottom of the page, clipped in place, was a polished pair of silver pilot wings. She ran her thumb over the edges, quietly, reverently, then pinned them to her chest. No speech. No crowd. Just a uniform made whole again. Later that week, a meeting was called in the main briefing hall. Mandatory attendance. No one was told why. Callahan stood at the back, arms folded, eyes fixed on the wall screen. The room fell silent as aerial footage played across the monitor, grainy black, and white thermal imaging from the flight recorder of Eagle 2. It showed her approach into Grid 9 Echo. The descent, the impossible landing, the extraction. Then the view shifted to the bodycam footage. The flare, the bird breaking through clouds, and the voice. When the video ended, no one clapped. No one moved. The base commander stepped forward. "I want to be clear," he said, voice firm. "We were grounded. Everyone here followed the order. That's not cowardice. That's policy. And sometimes policy saves lives." He paused. "But yesterday, someone chose saving lives over protecting rules." He turned to her. "Sergeant Callahan, you took a risk we didn't authorize. You acted alone, without backup. But you brought home every soul from that crash alive. And for too long, we've allowed the wrong version of your story to stand." He held up a small box, opened it, and stepped forward. "These should have been returned long ago." He handed her the wings, this time not clipped to paperwork. Real visible. She accepted them silently, pinned them next to the reinstatement insignia on her jacket. Her hands didn't shake. They didn't need to. After the meeting, she stepped outside. The sky was clearing, just barely. Patches of blue cut through the retreating storm clouds. A pair of choppers lifted off for a routine patrol, their blades thudding gently through the crisp morning air. One of them dipped its nose slightly toward her as it passed overhead. It wasn't regulation. It was recognition. A voice broke the moment. "Looks better on you than a clipboard." She turned. Lieutenant Hayes, coffee in hand, leaning against the railing like he'd been waiting there the whole time. "Didn't think I'd see that day," he said, nodding at the wings. "I didn't think anyone was looking," she replied. "They weren't," he said. "But they are now." Back in the hangar, someone had replaced the cracked, faded crew photo with a new one. It was the Santoro flight team, reunited, no longer hidden in the shadows of history. In the center stood Marion Callahan, helmet under one arm, wings gleaming under soft light. Beneath the frame, a brass plaque read Flight Sergeant Marion Callahan cleared for duty, courage in silence. There was no unveiling, no announcement, but everyone noticed. She never missed a morning. 3 days after the rescue, Flight Sergeant Marion Callahan walked into Hangar 3 at exactly 600 hours. No fanfare, no speech. Just a clipboard in hand and the same worn boots that had carried her across a mountain storm and back. The mechanics were already there. Coffee steaming, engines humming. But when she stepped through the door, the room shifted. Not loudly, just slightly. A subtle pause in conversation, a quiet straightening of backs, a few nods. They didn't salute. They didn't need to. Callahan got to work the same way she always had, methodical, focused, precise. She checked fluid levels on a Lakota, calibrated nav systems on a grounded Apache, reviewed the rotor wear logs for Eagle 2. Her hands moved with certainty. Her eyes missed nothing. But now, when she passed another airman in the hallway, they didn't look through her. They saw her, not as the ghost tech or the woman who used to fly. They saw her as the one who had flown into the worst storm in years, alone, and returned with 3 soldiers who wouldn't have lasted the night. Inside the operations center, the story spread in low, reverent tones. The new pilots, especially the younger ones, started asking around. What was the Santoro mission? How did she keep her key? Why didn't anyone tell us? The veterans didn't answer directly. Some just said, because not all heroes write their own reports. Others said, because we forgot to ask. Then came the photograph. No ceremony, no announcement. Just one morning, it was there, mounted on the wall where the old, cracked crew photo had once hung, the one with her face almost cropped out. This one was different, high, resolution, clean, centered. It showed Callahan and the Falcon 2 recovery team standing shoulder to shoulder in front of Eagle 2, the blades frozen mid, turned behind them. She stood in the middle, arms crossed, helmet at her side, flight suit zipped to the collar, her face unreadable, but unmistakably present. Below the frame, engraved in brass, Flight Sergeant Marion Callahan, cleared for duty, courage in silence. She never mentioned it. When someone pointed it out to her later, she glanced at it briefly, then returned to the checklist in her hand. But those who were watching, really watching, saw it. The pause, the faint nod, the way her hand rested on her chest where her wings now sat. Over the next few weeks, something began to shift at Carson Air Base. New recruits started asking her questions, not out of curiosity, but respect. How to handle low-altitude turbulence, how to read wind patterns without instruments, how to hold course when nothing on the radar makes sense. She never gave long answers, just short, precise advice. Sometimes a gesture, sometimes a tool passed silently across the table, and they listened, every word. Even the old-timers, the ones who once dismissed her as the quiet one with a clipboard, began to greet her with a certain tone, not protocol, but deference. One evening, after most of the base had gone dark, Callahan stood beside Eagle 2 while the maintenance crew secured it for the night. The hangar was quiet. The storm had long passed, but its memory still echoed in the rivets of the bird she'd flown into the eye of it. A young tech approached her, barely 20, nervous, holding a wrench like a school kid with a question. "My sister's applying to flight school," he said, almost whispering. "She says people like her don't get picked." Callahan didn't respond right away. Then she looked at him, voice steady. "Tell her it's not about being picked. It's about knowing what you can do, and being ready when no one else is." The young man nodded like he'd just been handed more than advice. He left the hangar smiling. By the end of the month, Callahan had logged over 20 hours of textbook, perfect flight time. Every mission she touched ran smoother. Every evaluation glowed with words like exceptional under pressure, flawless terrain navigation, halate situational judgment. But she never talked about the storm, never reminded anyone of what she had done, because her legacy didn't live in retellings. It lived in the silence she filled with action, in the example she left behind. Late one night, a lieutenant, Hayes, found her in the ready room, sitting alone at a metal desk, reviewing weather charts by dim overhead light. "You ever think of teaching?" he asked. She didn't look up. "Why?" "Because people are watching now, and they're learning, even when you're not saying anything." She paused, then smiled, just slightly. "I guess that means I'm doing it right." Marion Callahan didn't need speeches, ceremonies, or medals. She had something rarer. She had become the kind of story people told in hushed voices, the kind that never needed volume to carry weight, the kind of legacy you felt when you stepped into the hangar at dawn and saw her already there, working, watching, ready, because heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes, they just wear old boots and carry a key no one else remembered to ask about. The skies over Carson Base were calm again. The worst of the winter storm had passed, leaving behind crisp mountain air and a stillness that clung to the hangars like a held breath. Snowmelt trickled from the rooftop gutters, puddling beneath helicopters that now glinted in the morning sun. And once again, Flight Sergeant Marion Callahan was already at work, checking instruments, tightening clamps, logging pressure readings with the same care she'd shown on her very first day. To the untrained eye, she looked like any other experienced technician doing her rounds. But the base had changed. People paused when she walked by now, not out of fear or curiosity, but respect. Quiet, genuine, unspoken respect. They knew who she was, not because someone told them, but because she had shown them. She still said little. She didn't claim authority or bask in the second chances she'd earned. But when the young pilots reviewed flight data, they studied her telemetry. When a rotor vibration seemed off, her opinion overruled the checklist. And when someone muttered about how tight a landing zone looked on a recon mission, someone else would inevitably say, Callahan landed on a 6-foot rock shelf, in a storm solo. The stories didn't need embellishment. They were enough just as they were. One day near dusk, a junior mechanic approached her beside Eagle 2. He was barely out of training, nervous, fidgeting with the sleeves of his flight jacket. In his hand, a notepad scrawled with numbers, engine specs, and a question he couldn't seem to voice. Finally, he found the courage. "Mom, my sister wants to join flight school," he said. "She's got the hours, the grades, everything. But she keeps thinking people like her don't get picked." Callahan looked up from her pre-flight sheet. The hangar around them buzzed with late shifts and radio checks, but her eyes stayed steady on his. "Tell her," she said softly, "it's not about being picked. It's about knowing what you can do, and being ready when no one else is." He didn't answer, but the way he stood a little straighter told her everything she needed to know. Those words would travel farther than the hangar, farther than this base, maybe even far enough to reach a young woman somewhere, staring at a blank application, wondering if the sky had room for her. Callahan didn't try to become a symbol. That was never the point. But in the weeks that followed, something shifted. Not just in how others looked at her, but in how they looked at themselves. The ones who stayed quiet in meetings, the ones who didn't come from flight families or speak loudly at mess hall tables, began to realize something. That maybe silence didn't mean weakness. Maybe composure wasn't indifference. And maybe, just maybe, the person they overlooked yesterday was the one who'd carry them through tomorrow. She flew more now. Routine missions, supply runs, terrain checks, nothing flashy. But her name was on the manifest again, not buried in storage boxes or forgotten clearance lists, but printed in bold, next to the words, "Pilot, in command." One morning her co-pilot, a first-timer, asked her as they climbed above the tree line, "Do you ever think they'll give you a ceremony for what you did?" She didn't turn her head. She just watched the horizon, voice calm. "Ceremonies are for people who need reminding. I never forgot." And she hadn't. Not the mission. Not the mistake that wasn't hers. Not the silence that followed. She'd carried it all, not as punishment, but as preparation. Because someday, someone would need her when no one else was ready. And when that day came, she didn't ask permission. She just flew. A new patch appeared on her flight jacket not long after. It wasn't official, just something the rescue team had made. A simple hawk in flight, wings flared wide, stitched in silver thread. It wasn't loud, but it meant everything to those who had seen what she'd done. On her final log entry that month, the base commander scribbled a note beside her name. Leadership demonstrated in action. Guidance offered in silence. Legacy understood by all who watched. And under recommended status, he simply wrote permanent flight. That night, after the lights in the hangar dimmed and the engines cooled, Marion Callahan remained seated beside Eagle 2, charting altitudes for the next day's run. Her pen moved slow, deliberate. No rush. No deadline. Just the kind of quiet you earn when you stop needing recognition and start becoming one. Outside, a single star broke through the thinning clouds above the ridge. It didn't shine the brightest, but it was the first. And for anyone looking up that night, it was enough to know where to go next. In a world that often celebrates the loudest voice in the room, we sometimes forget the value of those who speak through action instead of applause. Marion Callahan didn't fight for a spotlight. She didn't demand to be seen. She just stayed ready, ready when no one else was. And when the storm came, when rules failed, When policy hesitated, it was her silence that broke through the noise. Not to be recognized, but to save lives. You don't need to be chosen to make a difference. You don't need a title or approval or applause. You just need to know what you can do and be willing to rise when no one else will. So if you've ever felt overlooked, dismissed, or doubted, remember her. Because being quiet doesn't mean you're weak. Sometimes it means you're already listening to what matters most. Have you ever known someone like Marion? Someone who never asked for recognition, but deserved it more than anyone else. We'd be honored to hear their story in the comments. And if you believe these stories deserve to be told, the ones buried in silence but written in courage, subscribe to our channel. You're not just joining a community. You're standing with those who lead even when no one's watching. Because the sky always remembers who dares to rise.